The great philosopher Plato is one of what we refer to as the classical period philosophers, which are Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Plato was Socrates' star student, and he's referred to as the father of rationalism because he was the first to, in a sort of systematic way, suggest that knowledge is acquired independent of the senses. And when we say knowledge, we mean reliable, true knowledge. It's only going to be arrived at intellectually or through conception, through rational reason, thought, as opposed to information that you get as a result of using one of your five senses. That is what rationalism is all about. Rationalism states, and Plato believes, that knowledge is acquired independent of the senses. And this plays heavily into his whole system. As I said, Plato was Socrates' star student, and even though Socrates wrote nothing down, Socrates there pictured in the center, Plato on the left and Aristotle on the right. Socrates never wrote anything down, but Plato did. Plato wrote down all that we know about Socrates and what Socrates had to say. But he expanded Socrates' ideas in a significant way beyond the human concerns that Socrates was solely interested in, essentially ethics, how we should live. He expanded it out to include a whole philosophy on the nature of everything, really. And one of the ways that he did this was to emphasize that understanding our world, understanding nature, is found not in beginnings but in the ends. In other words, not in the mechanical forces impelling from behind, but in final causes which attract. And what that means is that when you look out and try to understand our world about us, we usually, quite naturally, turn to cause and effect type of relationships to understand any particular thing. How does this thing come about? What was the situation preceding this event that brought it about? We always try to chase it back to the original beginnings in order to understand a thing. But Plato, in the tradition of Socrates, says, no, final causes. What things eventually are meant to be are what are drawing these things toward itself. So it's a very different way of looking at things, at least in the effort to understand how things are, why things are. Whether it's a metaphysical or epistemological question, it's a focus in the ends as opposed to the beginnings. Well, so if we were to say, well, what is justice? Plato would say, well, justice is not a thing. It's not something that you can see, something that you can hear or taste or touch, etc. It's only something that you think about. It's something that you understand in your mind. You can conceive it. You cannot perceive it. You can conceive it with thought, but you cannot perceive it with your five senses. Justice doesn't exist that way. It is something that is only in your mind. And Plato emphasized that in spite of the fact that it's happening in your mind, actual justice is more than just an idea in the mind. Justice for Plato cannot just exist as ideas in people's minds, because then if there were no people around, to think about justice, it wouldn't exist. And Plato believed in order to be able to think about justice, it must exist somehow independent of our minds. So justice he refers to as a form with a capital F. It's a form, meaning anything, any act that we would deem as just or reflecting justice is participating in the form of justice, and that form actually exists in a realm of forms. It doesn't exist materially. It isn't made up of molecules and atoms and so forth. There's no matter that constitutes justice. It's purely rational. It's purely something that can only be apprehended intellectually. But it is something, it is the object, justice is the object of our thoughts about justice. So justice, with a capital J, being a form, is the eternal object of the thought about justice. Well, all right, so these forms that he's referring to, therefore, are eternal, unchanging, imperfect, and imperceptible. So justice, you see, it doesn't have a beginning or an end. It exists eternally in that sense. It's unchanging. You don't have embryonic form of justice or a mature form of justice. It is just what it is, and it is immutable in that sense. It's perfect in the sense that it is ideal. It cannot have imperfections because it is a complete thing in and of itself as an idea. And of course, it's imperceptible in the same way that time is imperceptible or numbers that conceptually are imperceptible. They are just something that you conceive again. So if you were to think of, well, what is the form of a horse, for instance, you might think of a silhouette like this, because if you were to think of any specific type of horse, that would not be a form. That would be a specific, albeit just a thought in your head, it would be a specific kind of horse, a particular horse. And therefore, it would be something that you would be imagining that is made up of material, of physical things. And by definition, all physical material things are imperfect. They are imperfect copies of the form. The form of horse, which is not this silhouette, because you can perceive this silhouette in front of you. It is just the idea of hoarseness that you have in your head that enables you to label things as participating in hoarseness, whether it be a real horse or a stuffed animal or a blow-up doll of a horse or a picture of a horse. They are all participating in the form of horse. So according to Plato, these forms have a separate reality from the things of this world. And without those forms, you really wouldn't be able to cognitively understand or interpret all the particular things of this world.